Peasant revolts against British Raj. The accounts of Buchanan in 1810 gives a very vivid description of the lives of Santals who had settled down in the lower slopes of the Rajmahal hills by displacing the earlier tribe of Paharias. The Santals came to Bengal in 1780s, where they worked under the Jamindars as hired cultivators. When the British officials came up with the strategy of agricultural expansion, the Santals were asked to shift to Rajmahal hills. Unlike the Paharias, the Santals were ready to get transformed as settled agriculturists. They cleared forest and plowing the land. In 1832, this demarcated area was named as Damin-e-Koh, a land of the Santals. Damin-e-Koh became a turning point in Santals' lives. The land grant to the Santals stipulated that at least 1/10 of the area was to be cleared and cultivated within the first 10 years. The territory was surveyed and mapped. Enclosed with the boundary of pillars, it was separated from both the world of the settled agriculturists of the plains and the Paharias of the hills. After the demarcation of Damin-e-Koh, Santal settlements expanded rapidly. By 1859, around 1,473 villages had come as compared to just 40 in 1838. This brought an increased volume of revenue to the company. The Santals gave up their earlier life of mobility and settled down, cultivating a range of commercial crops for the market and dealing with the traders and moneylenders. However, this prosperity of Santals was short-lived. The stringent revenue collection policies of British on the Santals. The Santals soon found themselves surrounded by exploiters and manipulators. They started feeling the burden of heavy taxes levied on their cultivated lands by a company. Same time, they were continuously exploited by the moneylenders, that is, Dikus, who charged them high rates of interest, even took their lands in case of unpaid debts. On the other hand, the Jamindars were asserting control over the Damin area. The illiterate and simple Santals felt cheated. Many Santali tribes were turned into bonded laborers. Their wives were disgraced and used by the Jamindars and the money lenders. By 1850s, the Santals felt that the time had come to rebel against Jamindars, moneylenders and colonial states in order to live peacefully and respectfully. This resulted in the Santals revolt in 1855 to 56 against British Raj. In many villages, the Jamindars, moneylenders and their operatives were put to death. The open rebellion caught the British government by surprise. Though the revolt was crushed brutally by the East India Company, it did not come to an end. It had a long-lasting impact. Santal Pargana's Tenancy Act was the outcome of this struggle. This ensured some sort of protection to the indigenous people from the ruthless colonial exploitation. Through this act, the British tried to appease the Santals by removing their genuine grievances. Thus, Santal territory was born. The regular police was abolished, and the duty keeping peace and order and arresting criminals was vested in the hands of village headmen. The Indian agrarian unrest has a rather long history and was just not confined to Bengal and the Rajmahal hills. The countryside of Bombay Deccan was facing the similar exploitation under the British Raj in the hands of the moneylender and Jamindars. They were perpetually plagued with difficult conditions in the form of uncertain weather, the exploitation of the moneylenders, the oppressive taxation and revenue assessments, fluctuating prices of crops, and poor or negligible government subsidies. The support of the large families instigated and fueled the rebellion. Through the 19th century, peasants in various parts of India rose in revolt against moneylenders and grain dealers. One such revolt occurred in 1875 in the Deccan. An account of a revolt in the countryside of the Bombay Deccan. The movement began at Supa, a large village in Pune district. It was a market center where many shopkeepers and moneylenders lived. On 12th May 1875, riots from surrounding rural areas gathered and attacked the shopkeepers, demanding their bahi khatas, that is, account books, and debt bonds. They burnt the khatas, looted grain shops, and in some cases set fire to the houses of sahukars, that is, landlords. From Pune, the revolt spread to Ahmednagar. Then, over the next 2 months, it spread even further. More than 30 villages were affected. Terrified of Peasant attacks, the sahukars fled the villages, very often leaving their property and belongings behind. As the revolt spread, police posts were established in village to frighten the rebellious peasants into submission. Troops were quickly called in, people were arrested, and many convicted, but it took several months to bring the countryside under control. Now let us see what triggered this revolt. 1. A new revenue system. As British rule expanded from Bengal to other parts of India, new systems of revenues were imposed. The permanent settlement was rarely extended to any region beyond Bengal. As after 1810, agricultural prices rose, which in turn increased the value of harvest produce and more income to zamindars. Since the revenue demand was fixed under the permanent settlement, the colonial state could not claim any share of this enhanced income. In order to expand its financial resources, the colonial government came out with a new revenue policy to maximize its land revenue. The revenue system that was introduced in the Bombay Deccan came to be known as Raitowari settlement. This system, unlike the British system, constituted two ways to collect revenues from the cultivators. This system, unlike the Bengal system, constituted two ways to collect revenues from the cultivators. These revenues included undifferentiated land taxes and rents to be collected simultaneously. This system was prevalent in Bombay, Madras, Assam, and Burma. Number 3. Where the land revenue was imposed indirectly, that is, through the agreements made with the zamindars, the system of assessment was known as zamindari. Now, the impact of Raitowari system on the peasants. The first revenue settlement in Bombay Deccan was made in 1820s. This marked the beginning of a decline of peasantry classes and rise of upper classes. To start with, the revenue demanded by a company itself was so high that it forced the peasants in many places to desert their villages and migrated to new regions. The revenue payment was compulsory irrespective of failure of harvest or other natural calamities. Thus, in areas where there was fluctuating rainfall and not very fertile soil, they suffered the most. The collectors seized their lands in case of non-payment or levied severe penalties. By 1830s, the problem deteriorated more with the sharp fall in the price of agricultural products. This scenario continued for almost 1.5 decades. The situation became worse with a continuous famine in 1832 to 34, which completely left the cultivators devastated. 1/3 of the cattle of the Deccan were killed, and half the human population died. Those who survived had no agricultural stocks to see them through the crisis. All these things mounted up the unpaid balances of revenue. Peasants had no choice but to take loans from the moneylenders to pay their overdues. But once a loan was taken, the right found it even more difficult to pay it back. As debt mounted, the peasants' dependence on moneylenders increased. The moneylenders in turn exploited them to great extent. In many cases, the peasants became their bonded laborers or their lands were seized. By the beginning of 1840s, the peasantry class was in a pathetic condition and was struggling for their survival under the hands of moneylenders and zamindars under British Raj. However, by the mid-1840s, there were signs of an economic recovery of sorts. Many British officials had begun to realize that the settlements of the 1820s had been harsh. So the revenue demand was moderated to encourage peasants to expand cultivation. After 1845, agricultural prices recovered steadily. Cultivators were now extending their acreage, moving into new areas, and transforming pasture land into cultivated fields. But to expand the cultivation, peasants still needed money to buy clothes and cattle, seeds and land. For all this, they had to turn once again to moneylenders for loans. The cotton boom. The whole agricultural scenario of modern India changed with the sudden demand of Indian cotton internationally. Before the 1860s, 3/4 of raw cotton imports into Britain came from America. British cotton manufacturers for long had been worried about this dependence on American supplies. Thus, British set their agricultural expansion strategies in India. To produce cotton was on top priority as India possessed a suitable soil and a favorable climate and a cheap labor. When the American Civil War broke out in 1861, a wave of panic spread through the cotton circles in Britain. Raw cotton imports from America fell drastically. Frantic messages were sent to India and elsewhere to increase the cotton exports to Britain. In Bombay, cotton merchants visited the cotton districts to assess supplies and encourage cultivation. As cotton prices soared, export merchants in Bombay were keen to secure as much cotton as possible to meet the British demand. So they gave advances to urban sahukars, who in turn extended credit to those rural moneylenders who promised to secure the produce. These developments had a profound impact on the Deccan countryside. The riots in the Deccan villages suddenly found access to seemingly limitless credit. They were being given 100 rupees as an advance for every acre they planted with cotton. Sahukars were more than willing to extend long-term loans. While the American crisis continued, cotton production in Bombay and Deccan expanded. Between 1860 and 1864, cotton acreage doubled. By 1862, over 90% of cotton imports into Britain were coming from India. But those boom years did not bring prosperity to all cotton producers. Some rich peasants did gain, but for a large majority, cotton expansion meant heavier debt. As the Civil War ended, cotton production in America revived and Indian cotton exports to Britain steadily declined. Export merchants and sahukars in Maharashtra were no longer keen on extending long-term credit as the demand for Indian cotton fell and cotton prices went down. So they decided to close down their operations, restrict their advances to peasants, and demand repayment of outstanding debts. While credit dried up, the revenue demand increased. The riots were again facing crisis as they had no means to pay this inflated demand. Yet again, they had to turn to the moneylender, but the moneylender now refused the loans. The refusal of moneylenders to extend loans enraged the riots. What infuriated them was not simply that they had got deeper and deeper into debt, but the moneylenders were being insensitive to their plight. The riots came to see the moneylender as a devious and deceitful. Limitation law, the final blow to the miserable peasants. In 1859, British passed a law called a limitation law that stated that the loan bonds signed between moneylenders and riots would have a validity for only 3 years. This law was meant to check the accumulation of interest over a period of time. The moneylender, however, manipulated the law by forcing the right to sign new bond every 3 years, in which they entered the unpaid balance, which included the original loan and the accumulated interest as the principal, and charged a new calculated set of interest on it, thus making the debt even more burdensome for the rights. The moneylenders exploited the rights further by refusing to give receipts when loans were repaid. They entered fictitious figures in the bonds, acquired their harvest at low prices, and finally used to seize their properties completely. Deeds and bonds appeared as symbols of this new oppressive system. In the past, such deeds had been rare. It was introduced by the British, who were always suspicious of transactions based on informal understanding between the moneylenders and the peasants in the past. They wanted to improvise the clarity in the terms of transactions between the two classes through contracts, deeds, and bonds as per the law. This made the life of peasants more miserable. Majority of them were illiterate and were easily manipulated by the moneylenders. Thus, the culmination of Raitovari system, cotton boom, and limitation law together made the lives of peasants from worse to worst, and which resulted in the revolt of 1875. The Deccan Rights Commission. When the revolt spread in the Deccan, the government of India, worried by the memory of 1857, pressurized the government of Bombay to set up a commission of inquiry to investigate into the causes of the riots. The commission produced a report that was presented to British Parliament in 1878. This report, referred to as Deccan Rights Report, provides historians with a range of sources for the study of the riots. After presenting all the evidence, the commission reported that the government demand was not the cause of the peasant anger. It was the moneylenders who were to blame. Official reports, though invaluable sources for the reconstruction of the history, they had an inherent bias and lacked credibility as opposed to the independent media reports that existed then. Key points to remember in this essay are: British brought the Santals who recovered the downhill slides of the Raj Mahal and forced the Santals for cultivation purpose. Increasing forest lands were thus being cleared for agriculture. The Santals were allotted area in Raj Mahal Hills named as Damin-e-Koha, where they settled down as cultivators and flourished. However, in due course of time, they rebelled against British oppressive demands of high land revenue coupled with the exploitation of greedy moneylenders and zamindars who made their lives miserable. The outcome of the revolt was passing of Santal Parganas Tenancy Act. This relieved them for some time from the clutches of moneylenders and zamindars. Similar revolt happened in the countryside of Bombay Deccan in 1875, which witnessed discontentment among the peasants against moneylenders, zamindars, and officials. One of the main reasons of this revolt was a new land revenue policy called Raitovari system, which suggested two ways of collection: directly from the rights and secondly, collection from the zamindars. Raitovari system did nothing to change the miserable conditions of the peasants, rather it enhanced the misery of the farmers. This only got worse because of recurrence of regular drought and famine in 1860s. In 1860s, Indian peasants experienced the cotton boom because of sudden increase in demand of Indian cotton from England. It was on account of civil war in America which affected the supply of cotton to England. Therefore, England had to depend on India for its cotton supply. However, this benefited more the upper classes who invested more and they gave a liberal credit to the farmers. This gave some respite to the peasants. However, this boom was short-lived. In 1859 came the Limitation Law, which required documentation to be made by way of bond to be signed between moneylenders and peasants. The outcome was peasants who were illiterates were more manipulated and exploited by the moneylenders. This was the final blow to the peasants, which resulted in the revolt of 1875. The Deccan Commission report in 1879 was biased, and it was no good to improve the prevalent conditions of riots.